I'm with Jane Anson, Bordeaux editor for Decanter Magazine, on the rather ominous date of the 1st of April, having just finished almost a week of tasting on Primeur 2014. And we thought it would be fun to, instead of asking endless chateau proprietors, or indeed negotiants, to actually get a view from the press, their perception and understanding of this controversial vintage in many ways that we understand. But firstly, before talking about the controversy, to talk about the quality of the wines as you saw them, what do you see as a sort of principal characteristic of this vintage?
I've probably tasted now 200 or 300 wines, and my overall impression is that there are a lot. I was quite sceptical at the beginning, as you hear so often about the wines being better than expected. I wasn't sure. I've tasted quite a lot in vat over the months since harvest. I wasn't sure that it would extend into the smaller appellations, that it would move out of the very prestigious chateaus. But actually, I've been really pleasantly surprised by a lot of the wines. I think the features would be silky soft tannins, because you had a long September and October that was very, very warm. Yeah. So the tannins really had a great chance to soften up. But what didn't happen was the acidity didn't really drop down, because normally acidity will get kind of burnt off in August. It was still very wet really through all of August. So you had September and October where you had lovely, warm, dry sunshine, but you had cold nights that never kind of stayed hot. So the acidity still is quite high, and that's one of the marked aspects, I would say, of the vintage. But actually that means you've got lots of lovely, fresh, beautiful drinking wines.
Yeah, and there's a purity too about so many of them, I think.
Yeah.
And would you say, you've tasted a lot of wines, that it's a left bank Cabernet-based vintage or a Merlot-based right bank vintage at this stage? The
main problem that I think there is with Merlot is, again, Merlot needs a hot August. It's a grape which really responds much, much better to having good summer weather. So there are some beautiful Merlots, definitely, but the weaker spots are in the clay soils where they didn't get hot enough in September and October to properly ripen. Yeah. And often, obviously, the Merlots can take on more water when it's raining. They might not have concentrated quite as much as some Cabernets. So my personal, where the action is for me, is kind of northern Medoc. I've thought that Saint-Julien has been absolutely awesome, very, very consistent, beautiful Cabernets, and Pauillac as well has been very, and actually some Saint-Estèphe as well, very impressive.
We've had, I think none of us, press, trade alike, have had much difficulty in concentrating on the quality of the wines, and I think there are some wonderful surprises, as you say. There's some wonderful wines. But I guess the elephant in the room, of course, is the price. And if we go back, speaking to the UK trade, I think I can, because I'm speaking to lots of friends in the trade, 2013 on Primeur campaign was the worst in living memory, and certainly for Corney, I think the worst in our history. Why do you think that was?
I think quite simply the wines weren't good enough, and they didn't bring the price down enough to reflect the quality of the wines. I think they got there was a skill on evident in how they made the wine. They were very good to work with what they had. There wasn't over-extraction. They were soft wines, not all of them. There were some shockers, but there were some good ones. But they took that to mean, oh, haven't we done well? So they didn't bring the prices down as much as they should have done. And consumers all over the world weren't convinced that the price was right.
And where do you think the pricing went wrong? I mean, do you have to go back further than 2013 to reach the core of the problem?
The core of the pricing going wrong has got to be 2009. I think when you look at the figures in terms of when did you make money by buying on Primeur, everything was absolutely great. You can see returns right up till 9. 9 were brilliant wines. Nobody's doubting that. 10, for me, better, even quality than 9. But if you put your money in then, you just weren't making the returns. And you're going to have to wait an awful long time, I think, to get real returns from those vintages. Yeah. And then that set off this whole thing.
Yeah. And it's an irony that the two greatest vintages of a generation should have prompted this, because they are wonderful wines, and I think they, as you suggest, people are going to have to be very, very, very patient before they
Luckily,
see.
the wines themselves will last. They're fantastic aging wines.
Yeah. So picking up on that, how do you think that 2014 ought to be priced in relation to previous vintages?
I think for a start, there are wonderful wines, but they are drinking wines. I did taste it, I have to say, maybe Monroe's. There are a couple of exceptions which are very, very much aging. They're going to last, they're beautiful. But most of them are lovely wines to drink in the medium term. So 5 to 15 years, you're going to have a superb compared to certainly the 11s and the 13s. I like the 12, I think it was a little bit underrated. But I still think the 14 is probably a touch above. But I think in terms of pricing, they basically need to forget about it. What you keep hearing this week is, oh, we can't bring it down because then the 13 will never sell. You know, we can't possibly go lower than the 13 because that's going to ruin that pricing. They got that pricing wrong last year, so they have to really forget about the 13 and start from scratch this year and think, what can the market bear? What will the market take? And my personal feeling is, chateaux need to not look at what their neighbours are doing, look at their markets, but also they need to all think, do we believe in this system? And if we believe in it and we want this system to keep going, they have to show a vote of confidence in the actual system of Emprimeur.
It's a message that it's easy for us to discuss intellectually. How many chateau proprietors have you discussed that with, and what has their reaction been?
It's a good question. I've discussed it with a lot of them. And I have to say, not always a great reaction. Some agree, definitely some agree. And I hope that we'll see that. I think we'll probably see quite a two-tier. I think there will be quite a few chateaux actually who are quite sensible and will price well. And actually, if we pick over the figures, there are quite a few that have been sensible for a number of years. But we tend to get, and certainly journalists were just as guilty of this as everybody, if not more so, we get blinded by the ones who really price very highly. And that skews the perception as a whole. So I think probably we need to be much better at thinking there's a two-tier. Ignore those ones who don't price correctly and focus on the ones that do.
And of the ones that you feel have been, in a sense, most guilty in their pricing initiatives, where do you think that's focused? I mean, is that focused at the very highest level, or do you feel that the lesser class growers or the top cru bourgeois are also sort of painted with the same brush? Or
I think probably, and I spoke to a few chateau owners about this today, one of the problems can be when it's not the owner who's making, or rather, not the owner who's working every day in the property, so there'll be an owner at a higher level or shareholders or whoever, and they're making a decision by committee. And making any decision by committee is not always the best way to achieve the right result. So I think probably there's more flexibility when there's an owner who also is making the wine or living full-time on the property, and they tend to make more sensible decisions. So I think maybe it's a problem of either super seconds who really have an ego involved at a higher level, maybe at the ownership level, or just people who are slightly removed maybe from the market. I certainly have heard of quite a few instances of when the managing director has said we need to price it at X, which would be a reasonable low level, and they've been told no by higher.
Yeah. Going back to the UK trade for a moment, the margins under which the trade, both in the UK, I think in other markets around the world, have shrunk and shrunk and shrunk over the years. The négociants of Bordeaux have also seen their margins squeezed. Do you think there's anything more that the UK trade should be doing to promote the vintage or promote Bordeaux?
I think that one of the problems from the Bordeaux point of view is that they stop listening when the idea of bring the prices down every year. I don't think it's working. I think we all and they need to, as I say, I think it's more about believing in the system of Emprimeur if it works. And so maybe it's very difficult it's not really an area that I would know as much about in terms of how to sell them. But I think we should all remember, I was trying to get some 2005s in single bottle. It's totally impossible. They were all gone, or you can maybe get one or two. But there is an incentive to buy stuff that you really like at source if it's difficult to get later on down the line. But I think the problem is that there's no excitement right now in the system of buying. So but that has to come from Bordeaux. They have to give some excitement back.
So to sum up, how do you think the proprietors need to re-establish that link between them and the end consumer with the en-primeur system?
They need to stop looking at what their neighbours are doing. They need to start thinking about what their consumers want. They need to stop thinking that selling to a negociant is the same thing as selling, because it's absolutely not. I think the structure of Bordeaux makes that very difficult. So negociants hold a lot more. I think the public perception, quite a lot is that negociants themselves are making huge margins. As you said, it really is not the case anymore. But they're not being listened to either. They also say to the chateaus, look, you need to be reasonable. So I think that the chateaus who are making brilliant wine, they've invested hugely. That, you know, the wines are, no doubt about it, incredibly high level. But unless they give a gesture towards people thinking that they're fun and enjoyable, and it doesn't have to be about making money, but it has to be about feeling you're at least getting value for money.
And perhaps, yes, perhaps not losing money.
Yeah, well, that certainly would help.
That's the thing that
I think that
with.
If you look back to 2009 and 10, when China came into the market, what a catastrophic mistake they made to try and squeeze as much as they could out of a new market of people who loved Bordeaux, who were so happy to be here, so thrilled to be discovering it. And rather than thinking, wonderful, let's slowly accompany them and keep them for 100 years as new clients, they tried to milk everything they could in 3 years' time and then broke. I think they will look back and think, why on earth did we do that?
Jane Anson, Bordeaux editor for Decanter Magazine, thank you.